I don't see a single 100 crore L&D company. Although there are 6,500 odd training companies registered in India alone, it's difficult to see a 100 crore company.
Wherein we believe that every success should be that mega success. Plenty of smaller successes and Indian companies have been successful. And I fully expect that within the next 3, 4, 5 years, there'll be a lot of SME IPOs that will happen in that segment. A lot of very interesting companies, a lot of very, very interesting use cases that are coming up.
If you were to be presented a training solution or a product, what are those 2 or 3 things that are must-haves in it?
One of the first things I would look for is the ability to easily create and modify content. How do I keep my content real and up to date at all points in time? Most training systems fail because the content is outdated. You make it available for a subject matter expert who need not be a very highly trained software engineer.
Content should be able to be modified for deployment at any time with the latest. And anybody should be able to edit it. And if it's scalable and accessible to a large population, then I think these are probably the 3 things that mix3d also brings along.
Which is why I'm particularly enthused and excited about what you guys have built out. I believe it has got a lot of promise. Plus points the platform that you have built out has got. The user interface and its ability to either model it in an immersive virtual reality head-mounted display mechanism or a flat screen, providing a desktop ability to consume it. Easy ability for you to reach out to a larger community.
Hi, welcome to the Immersive Edge podcast powered by mix3d. This is where the who's who of learning and development, human resources, corporate trainers, and corporate training companies come to share their work and experience. If you're looking to join the learning and development industry, or if you are an educational content provider, this podcast is for you. Our guest today is an aerospace pioneer, a former scientist at DRDO, and was a senior management professional at Cisco. He founded Pinaka Aerospace in 2006, which went on to be acquired by Zetwork. Post his exit, he and his ex-colleagues and friends started Ozone, an incubation facility which empowers deep tech startups. Totally our pleasure to be in conversation with Mr. Sundar Ramakrishnan. Sundar Ramakrishnan.
Happy to be here, guys.
Sir, scientist, ex-MNC, technocrat, venture capitalist. What are the other adjectives that you have?
Not very much. I think you're overplaying some of these things also. I think I have been blessed, have had an opportunity to participate in multiple very exciting things through my life. So I'm not too sure I contributed very much myself. It's more about perhaps being lucky enough to be in the right time, in the right place.
Well, that's modesty. Well, sir, I remember it was a phone call that I got from you, and you were looking for a solution for aerospace.
Yep.
You'd founded an aerospace company called Pinaka.
Correct.
Right. And you were looking for a solution, and that's the time that I first met you.
Right.
So there are a few things that I still remember from that conversation. You're very clear about what you wanted from the input, the process, and the desired output. I must tell you this, sir, at the sound of, might sound a little patronizing, but usually customers know the output. Right? The input and process is generally left to the vendors to figure out. So I knew that day that I'm actually speaking to an informed buyer. And as we spoke, we kept in touch. There's so many facets of your life that I've been able to kind of see. And I think in today's podcast, I'd like to get into a few of them. You can deny to answer a few questions. I'll push my luck though.
Okay. Let's see how that goes. Yeah.
So, sir, aerospace you started off Pinaka sometime in 2007, right? And by then, you'd already worked with DRDO.
That's right.
And you'd worked with Cisco.
Correct.
And then Cisco is largely complete technology.
Right.
And your first job with DRDO has a lot to do with aerospace. Was that the
defense
college?
And aerospace, both, yeah. But
and that pushed you to start Pinaka?
Kind of. Very clearly, there is a element of core technologies that are being developed and an application for those core technologies.
Mm-hmm.
I see the defense and aerospace industry as a user of multiple core technologies in a manner where very critical use cases can be deployed as an application of those core technologies. So if you take networking, where there's voice, video, data, the internet began with data,
right?
Then it migrated to voice, and then now a video, and then in the future, or already, there's a migration towards AI-based payloads for data to be communicated, right? And there are various nuances for how that can happen. And then you overlay other elements, such as things like having secure communications, as an example. Okay. So it is not just about communicating data, but for the longest time, going back all the way back in history, it is about how secure, how much trust can I impose on the data that has been communicated,
right,
across the two ends. And then whether it is a runner back in the historical times, or more recently when there are two computers talking to each other.
Right.
It is about, is there a man in the middle listening? Is there a man in the middle who's spoofing?
Yeah.
Am I getting wrong messages from a party who is identifying himself or herself as somebody else? So element of trust that I mentioned to you all becomes computational rather than people-oriented. It is not about, can I trust this source, or do I know that this channel is secure? It is more about, how do I do that automatically? How do I do that autonomically? How do I do that in a computational method?
Right.
So essentially, I see a tight overlap between these two, and I see the defense and aerospace industry especially as almost the pinnacle of the use case of what we see as the evolution of computation in the last let us say 4 or 5 decades. Computation is actually a little bit more, because it is about computation, it is about networking, it is about storage. Okay, so how do I get all these things together? Storage, we all know the price has gone down drastically, right? So the cost of memory is almost nothing right now. The Moore's law and whatever else may happen has ensured that computation, the ability to have computation in your pockets, today has skyrocketed. As the old analogy goes, on an average, each of us have, as a consequence of having a phone in our pockets, more computational power than the Apollo program had altogether, right? Each of us have more computation in our pockets than the entire Apollo program of NASA had, where they put man on space, on the moon, right?
Yeah.
So, and then similarly, networking speeds. Right? So the ability to network from the olden days, where you use very slow wireless, where there is a very low bandwidth, to using telephone lines for communicating, but again, copper being a twisted pair, having limited capacity to transmit data, to now having things like 5G and evolution will soon evolve into 6G. Or Wi-Fi and so on, Wi-Fi 6 and so on and so forth, where there is an ability to push vast amounts of data through either wired or wirelessly. Right? So there's a convergence. And now that you have compute, storage, network at a very high capacity, what use cases can you put it to?
Right.
And now if you can all take a step back. Now, if you look at it, defense technology has always been the forefront throughout human civilization. Has always been the forefront of driving technology forward.
Okay.
Right? It is almost always, how do I secure myself? How do I protect myself? How do I go and acquire some asset which has to be acquired by force? Has always been the precursor for technology development in human civilization, whether it's a invention of fire and spears back in the day, or maybe throwing stones or whatever else from the caveman, till the more recent things like GPS.
Right.
When we all saw the first use of GPS as an example, it was the Gulf War of 91, where Iraq was being attacked, and we were all like, this is like a science fiction thing, where the missile knew exactly the pinpointed location of the target.
Right.
And there were videos of CNN, which I used to watch being in college back in the day, saying that they could pinpoint and put it through a particular window of a Iraqi palace. Right? So that is amazing. Wow. This is 91. And it is supposed to be defense technology. Now you suddenly say, you know what? All of us have GPS in our pockets, and to navigate through Bangalore traffic, I use GPS because it says, oh, this road is red, that road is blue, you go through the blue road. All right? So it has always began by having a defense orientation, but technology has eventually found its way through to
civilian app.
All of us using it on a day-to-day basis, right? So consequently, I believe there is a great use case in defense and aerospace where they always are the precursor, driving things forward, and then finding a civilian application for it eventually, which benefits all of humankind.
Right. So I literally see that it really didn't change much from DRDO to Cisco. Again, deep tech, right? Driving the world. Yep. The scale was larger, while probably DRDO would have been focused largely on Indian defense. And then you come back and start off Pinaka.
Right.
And soon after Pinaka, right now you are promoting Ozone.
Right.
Spelled OJONE.
Right.
Any reason why the J?
Okay, first of all, Ozone is opportunity zone. Okay, that's how we arrived at the name. We are a startup incubator. We we provide normal amenities for any startup. The assumption is that as a startup founder, they don't have enough money to pay rent, so they can't afford office buildings, or rather that the money that they possess is perhaps more usefully deployed in building new technology, in R&D effort of various kinds, hiring more people, equipment, etc., etc.
Right.
Or being able to access common services that any company requires, regulatory filings, tax, company service, secretarial services, and so on and so forth on the other hand. Then you also have day-to-day operational requirements, admin, finance, HR, travel, talent acquisition, right? So why should a startup possess all these things when the capacity utilization is so low?
Right.
They may not require a talent acquisition guy working with them full time. So can we optimize over there by having one talent acquisition person serving 10 startup companies, right? Or one travel desk supporting multiple companies, and so on. So we also have space, we also have these common services. That's one part of it, but that's the easier part of it. The more difficult part is being able to align the ability of myself and my partners in Ozone, excuse me, to be able to co-create value with the startup that we induct into our portfolio. Most times, startup founders have a very good, strong understanding of technology, but going from technology to product is a big leap.
Right.
An understanding of the technology and an ability to understand how to build a technology, how to build the intellectual property around it and nail it down, file patents and whatever else, is an necessary but far from sufficient condition for your startup to be successful.
Agreed.
What is your go-to-market plan? What is your monetization plan? What is your product roadmap? What is the market fit, product market fit for your product? Which is the minimum viable segment of market that you need to go after? Are all a whole plethora of questions which startup founders actually find it very difficult to address. They just see a glimmer of hope in the promise that the technology offers. But chasing that becomes sometimes a very torturous process for them, because very soon they realize that once they get past the sexiness of building the technology, the world hits them with, oh, by the way, for you to be able to sell it and make it a viable product and make it a
increase adoption.
A feasible company to be successful is a far different thing, right? Adoption by customers and so on and so forth, right? So there is a whole lot more to building a company, and that is where Ozone comes in and supports these startup founders with the, shall I say, the complementing skills that are required for the startup to be successful.
Right.
So that is how we do this. And a small bit on the name, because the easier answer is that ozone.com is very expensive. Okay. Ozone.com is cheaper. But I have another answer for that, which is that I used to have a chemistry teacher in high school. Mr. Prabhakar Reddy, I value him. I mean, he taught me all the chemistry I know was from him. And at some point in time, we actually got very friendly with him. And Mr. Prabhakar Reddy used to come to class and say, oxygen, hydrogen, and zinc. And I was like, if you can say zinc, you can also say oxygen. If you can say oxygen, you can say zinc. What is the problem is? Right? And so in honor of him, we also thought that, okay, fine, Ozone becomes the name by which we'll call this company. So.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thank God. You kept that very simple.
Yeah.
I see, but while we were doing the research on Ozone and the portfolio of companies that you have,
yep.
I see again and it's bound to happen, people who are in fintech, they tend to like fintech companies, right? Most of your investments have also been on founders who are chasing deep tech problems.
Sure.
Right. And now I see the reason why, you understand this space.
Exactly, right? So for example, there are lots of startups in agri-tech or health tech and med tech. Right? And we find that we will be fooling ourselves and we'll be fooling the startup founders if we believe that we can add value to them. We cannot. So we also go after those customers, those startups, to whom we can actually add value, right? And co-creation of value is the byline by which we swear by when we look at startup founders. We want to be partners in their growth.
Right.
And we cannot add value to them just by providing space or admin guy or a finance guy, right? So it is more than that. That they can go to any service provider. There are people who even provide CFO services, who come and spend, let us say, a couple of hours every week with you and provide you CFO services, right? We don't want to be that kind of a company. We are not a services-oriented company which says that I'll invoice you at the end of each month based on some retainer fee. That is not the way in which we want to do things. We believe in the startup goal, and we want the startup founders to feel that we can add value to them in some elements of what we offer them, and we grow together.
Right.
So we don't charge service fees. That is not the model in which we work. We take a stake in the company based on the partnership, the contours of the partnership that we strike with the startup, and that is how we position our relationship, and we ensure that our success depends on the startup's success. So there is an exit which the startup gets at some point in time. Maybe a VC comes in, maybe they get positive with some revenue positive. Maybe there is a angel investor comes in, whatever else that may be an exit that may happen. At that point in time is when we exit. Saying that, okay, fine, you reached a level and now let us say there is a VC who has come and invested. The VC is in a better position for you to take you to the growth stage. Right? Because the skills required that for supporting a startup through the early stage is different from the skills required to see them through the growth stage. Right. And there may be somebody else who is better positioned to see a company through the growth stage. And when we hand it off to a VC, we believe that the VC will take care of working in conjunction with the startup founders, taking them through the growth stage of the company.
I think I have one question for the VC in you now. This is not just mine, but from the community that I come from, which is, training and development or learning and development that people like to call it. I don't see a single 100 crore L&D company. Although there are 6,500 odd training companies registered in India alone, it's difficult to see a 100 crore company. And I've never heard, other than the exception of Akash, which Byju's bought, but that's a totally different ballgame altogether. But they had resident students, established markets. I have not seen VC money chase any learning and development as such? Is there a reason why it is eluded?
I'm not too sure you're entirely right also, Jay. See, EduTech and the examples that you mentioned are very good examples. Of course, we also have some other examples like Byju's, where they address a certain market segment where the market is easily addressable, identifiable, and consequently, and the numbers justify it, right? So, as against the number of IIT or a NEET aspirants going to an enterprise and saying that I'm going to give you learning and development solutions intended for, let us say, banking use case.
Right.
Okay? The addressable community is very very limited. It is also amorphous. It's not very. It's not like there's a general public that's available who are all wanting it, because each enterprise, let's say in the example that we talked about, bank one may have a different workflow, different processes, different norms as against bank two.
Correct.
So it's not like you can create generic content and make it available for all of them. So the trick, I believe, and that's one of the things that I liked about how you guys are positioning SimPencil and the mix3d solution that you guys are building out, is looking at the common minimum framework that is required, which removes the complications from having to build everything from ground up and have enterprises focus instead on the content that needs to be created, assuming that some building blocks are available for them to build on top of, a library of objects, a library of how to construct a workflow and how to construct a process. How do I conduct an assessment for people who are taking the training and so on and so forth. So there is a fairly big market for that kind of thing, but not quite in the same way that the edutech companies that we have seen are. Right. And that is true whether it is in India or the examples that you talked about, Akash, Byju's, whoever else, or you go to the Udemy's and the others of the world, right? So they also create content. They also have generic frameworks using which content can be created by multiple participants who can then monetize on their platform.
Right.
So that is value, but finding the addressable market is a problem.
And it's not large enough.
It's not, yeah. So that perhaps is the impediment in my...
I'd want to push a little further. How big is big when you say an addressable market? What does a VC look for? How big should it be to warrant his attention?
There's no generic answer for that. There are VCs and there are VCs.
Okay.
Are you a guy who is investing in the $5 to $10 million range? Are you the guy who will invest in $100 to $500 million range? The answer varies accordingly.
Right.
So there are some companies which a $100 million company will not even look at, but may be interesting for somebody who's investing $10 million or average ticket size.
Got it.
Now that said, consequently, you also say that my growth expectation in terms of percentages may be the same, okay, but I'm okay with the $2 million increase. My $10 million becomes $2 million, $12 million, $14 million, whatever else, and I get an exit is one thing. From saying that I expect my $100 billion to become $100 million to become a $1 billion company, right? So the expectations may vary, and it is not a linear growth in expectations, right? So that's also a variation in that aspect of how you see growth. But that said, see, we should also turn inwards and say, where is India in its development plan? So for us to always benchmark ourselves with a WhatsApp, which a 20-member company sold itself for big bucks to Facebook or else, is perhaps a wrong notion. Okay? It's a
survivor bias.
Yeah, right. And there's been only one WhatsApp in the last several years, right? There's been only one Google in the last 25 years. How many people are coming up with a better search engine? There was initial hype around OpenAI and the ChatGPT being something which will replace Google. I've not seen that happen in the last 2 years, 2.5 years.
Right.
Right. So people still go to Google, right? So why is it that even a large company like Microsoft has not made Bing successful related to Google? Right. It's not even made it equivalent to what Google search is, right? Google has almost become a verb for us.
Yeah.
So there is a bias in all of us, as you rightly pointed out, wherein we believe that every success should be that mega success. There are plenty of smaller successes and Indian companies have been successful. And I fully expect that within the next 3, 4, 5 years, there'll be a lot of SME IPOs that will happen in that segment. A lot of very interesting companies, a lot of very, very interesting use cases that are coming up, even in the segment that I'm familiar with, defense and aerospace. Just yesterday, there was a company which tested out a drone, which has an ability to, it's a medium altitude, long endurance drone capable of being in the 150 kilometer range, carrying a 30 kilogram payload. Okay, that's a big deal. Now, a drone in our minds is these small things that you can assemble, buying stuff from Amazon, buy the rotors, buy a motor, buy stuff like that. And almost always the payload is a camera, right? So that is very uninteresting. You use it for shooting in a wedding reception, not for serious use cases, right? So a hobbyist use case for a drone is what we almost always think of. But you suddenly go look at different, like this company has done, think of it in a different way and say that I need to have more interesting use cases. And I need to construct a product which is available on day one for the end user. The end user almost always is, in this particular use case, may not be a very highly educated soldier. He's not an engineering degree holder. Okay, so he cannot be expected to debug some problem which may happen on the field. He is operating under intense pressure. He's operating in a manner where things should just work like clockwork, with microsecond level actions to be taken. Now, when those things are happening, you expect your product to be having those features in a manner where the soldier can use it in a trustworthy manner, in a repeatable manner.
Reliable and repeatable.
All right. So those two things become very, very important. So you fashion your product along those lines. Now you come back and say, can I interest investors in this product? And here is a market which I believe I can address. And you'll find people who are interested in that kind of space.
Oh, interesting. Brilliant. So again, staying with the ozone idea, there might be viewers watching this podcast who might want to know more about ozone. So where can we find you and how can they send their pitch decks to you?
So ozone.com, ojone.com is the place to go to. We have our portfolio there. We have our partners listed there. We have our we have a very wide network of advisors whom we can roll in when required. And there is also an ability to either email or upload your pitch deck to us. There's also a phone number listed. Feel free to pick up the phone, call, and somebody will attend to your call, set up meetings that are required, and take things forward from there on. And the portfolio that we have, as you pointed out, Jay, also has provides an indication as to what kind of companies are of our interest. We want to talk to only those startups whom we can relate to. Not that the other startups are not doing anything interesting. It's just that it's not something that we can add value for, right? So we operate in a certain space. Like I said, there must be a deep tech orientation. Now the application can be multiple, and that is okay. But we must be able to understand that the underlying technology in a manner where we can add value to those startups, and that is a community that we will talk to.
That's actually a very different way of looking at, VC conversation.
Sure.
Largely it is, okay, here is my deck, this is my valuation. Do we agree? We don't agree. So that is the conversation you refuse to have.
We absolutely veer away from that kind of a conversation. That has its place. I'm not dissing them for what they are. Okay, their view of looking at it is more from a growth stage perspective. Is this a viable company? Is the market lucrative enough? Are the projections realistic, and so on and so forth? We, on the other hand, look at a startup which has not even got a projection. We help them make the projection. We help them identify the market segment they should go after. We help them fine-tune the product in a manner where a certain class of segment, a class of customers will be interested. I help fine-tune those things and then prepare them for a later stage VC to come in and say, is the market viable? Is the projections real? And so on and so forth.
Oh, brilliant. This reminds me of this movie that I saw on Netflix called Shrikant.
Shrikant, okay.
It is, you must watch this. It's about a gentleman who's differently able. And President Kalam had written a 25 lakh check And later, this guy's company was bought over by the Tatas.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and I know that there is some common parallels there as well. And at one point in time, I know that you reported to President Kalam himself. How was it like working
Not
with
when he was president. He was still a scientist with the DRDO at that point in time.
Okay.
My first job was with the DRDO, as you correctly pointed out. And so I joined a lab which is focused on building missiles, and Dr. Kalam was the head of that lab. He was the director of the lab. And he kind of believed in a very flat structure. So even though I was fresh from college, I was amongst the several reportees that he had, myself and a bunch of people who all joined the DRDO together. And even though I was recruited for the high-performance computing segment of DRDL, he was, the very fact that he had envisioned, along with, at that time, the scientific advisor in the DRDO, Dr. Arunachalam, again, a visionary, something that the DRDO of today owes a lot to, having set up the organization in the manner in which it is set up. It is people like Dr. Arunachalam, Dr. Kalam, who envisioned saying that this is early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. I'm aging myself, but anyway. There was a time when India was under intense
sanctions
of various kinds, right? The US said, no, I can't sell you a supercomputer because you bad guys will build missiles and aircraft and stuff like that. So, and whatever else, right? So nuclear bombs, stuff. So we were denied technology. There was and it carried forward through the 90s, even though we liberalized in 91, which is when I joined the DRDO, fresh from college back then. Through the 90s, the sanctions remained because first we were just finding our way through. And then toward the end of the 90s, there was also this nuclear test that we conducted again.
Yeah, Pokhran.
So sanctions came back again, the Pokhran test. So effectively, for a very long duration, India remained under very, very stringent sanctions of various kinds. So the DRDO and ISRO and various CSIR organizations, if I look at the broad research and development labs that India had at that point in time, defense research, space research, and CSIR being more broad-based, agriculture, health, education, whatever else, were all under intense sanctions, did not have access to technology, and when computing was the required element of doing more things, we did not have the ability to have the right computing infrastructure. So it was Dr. Arunachalam, Dr. Kalam, and others who envisioned that we require more software engineers joining the DRDO and participating in its growth in tangential elements of growth, because up until that point in time, they said, oh, you know what, unless you're an aerospace engineer, there's no place in the DRDO. Unless you're a rocket scientist, there's no place in ISRO, and so on and so forth, right? And just simplifying it, but to make the point.
Right.
So suddenly you say, you know what, here's an organization which is going to invest in high-performance computing, because we were denied supercomputers at that point in time. So I say, go develop high-performance computers, because that is going to be important for our missile program, for our LCA program, and whatever else. So even though Dr. Kalam could not quite relate to what was happening, he knew that this was an investment that is worthwhile making, and was constantly supporting us, egging us on. We used to talk about problems which we were facing. I don't think he understood the full element, and maybe it is also quite trivial because we were all fresh engineers at that point at that time, right? And yet he would give us a time, he would talk to us, and I remember at least on one occasion when, I must also say that we also used to be neighbors. Okay, so
wow.
So the DRDO had, and actually all military establishments have an officers' mess where people go and have food and whatever else. And then there's also bar attached, which is a more interesting thing. And then there's a single officer's accommodation, which is adjacent to the officer's mess. Normally, there's almost a regular template across all military establishments. So a single officer's accommodation means that you're unmarried, so you have only a room and one living room, one bedroom, and you're expected to go to the officer's mess to have food. Okay. So he was single, I was single. He remained single, I did not remain single. That's a different thing. So we used to joke that he went to the largest single officer's accommodation, which is the Rashtrapati Bhavan in his later life. Right?
Wow.
And at that time, in the early 90s, there were only like 10 channels on television, not much to do.
Right.
So we used to go Kanchanbag, where the DRDO township was in Hyderabad. We used to go for a walk in the evening after dinner or whatever else. And he was a very simple man. He used to put a shawl around himself in winter time, kind of get slightly chill. Wear his Hawaii chappals and walk along with us through the community. And we used to be talking about what's happening. And that is one of the greatest fears myself and my colleagues always had. His questions used to be, so what's happening? Right? And if you tell him the same thing as you told him, I mean, it's not like it will happen every day, right? But let us say once a week, whenever he was not traveling, he was in Hyderabad and had the time to walk with us, etc. And if you tell him the same thing as what you told him last week, he said, but that's what you told me last week also.
Wow.
So it has to be different. So he had a phenomenal memory. And it kind of also had the good pressure element of pushing us forward and trying out new things and so on and so forth. And sometime, I remember on one occasion, I was really stuck with some problem. And he heard the problem, he talked to me, he said, did you try this, did you try that? Meaning that, I have a computing view, an algorithmic view of things and saying I'm stuck over here. He had an application orientation saying that, did you try that, did you try this? Okay. And he knew that I was stuck.
Sure.
And the next morning, of course, the days before cell phones and whatever else, phone rang, the receptionist said, hey, Sundar, you have a call. I go to the front desk, pick up the call. And I can't name him. He says, I'm Professor so-and-so from IISc Bangalore. I was sitting in Hyderabad. Okay. I'm Professor so-and-so from the Aerospace Department of IISc Bangalore. I said, okay. He said, Dr. Kalam said that you have a problem. I was like, okay. He said, well, so what's your problem? And I was sweating buckets because I did not even know. See, at the very least, you must know how to characterize the problem.
Right.
I did not even have that ability. Right. So those are all examples. So the one hand, next morning, he remembered that I had a problem. That is what I really give credit to him for. Right. He kept the entire organization engaged in a manner where he, at the back of our head, we knew that he was supportive of the requirements and was always willing to go out of the way to remove impediments along our way. And that is a lifelong learning from him. It is not about science and technology. It's more about his organizational skills, his organization building capability, which is something which I took forward throughout my career. Something that I implemented when I was running a multi-billion-dollar product line in Cisco. I built it because I had a bunch of engineers who I think to some extent may have benefited from my knowledge of how to run organizations, how to lead organizations that I learned from my very first job working with Dr. Kalam.
Oh, brilliant.
If I picked up some technology from him, maybe I have succeeded more, but I was not good enough for that. So,
well, sir, there's so many people that, we've met. At the time that you met him, did you ever know that he would be president?
Of course not. I don't think he himself knew that. But he was not even scientific advisor at that time, right? So it was after Dr. Arunachalam retired that he moved to Delhi, went on to become the scientific advisor. And then they created a special position for him called the principal scientific advisor after he moved forward from this. Scientific advisor is a role within the DRDO. So it is called SA to RM, scientific advisor to the Raksha Mantri, which is at that point in time the head of DRDO. And then they created during the Vajpayee government, there was a role created for him called the principal scientific advisor. So wherein all the other scientific organizations within India, including the ISRO, CSIR, etc., reported into the principal scientific advisor. So the role is created for him. And it is after that he became Bharat Ratna and went on to become the president much later. So,
brilliant, sir. And, you were talking to me about the sanctions.
Yep.
And, simulators are extremely crucial especially in a DRDO kind of a setup, because there it is. I mean, you do a experiment in the real world, it costs you money. And it's not that you can order one as soon as something goes wrong. There is a huge development time behind it. And when was the first time you actually used a simulator? Was it at the DRDO?
Yeah, it was the DRDO. So if you may call a wind tunnel a simulator, that was the first time that I really saw something, wherein you had a wind tunnel, you put a missile body through it, you understand the aerodynamics, right? So what they actually used to do is to have colored smoke. Okay. So imagine a long tube, and in which you place the body of an aircraft or a wing or a missile cone or whatever else it may be that you want to study the aerodynamics of. And then this body is moving through air at a certain speed. Okay. And the speed varies, because when you, let us say an aircraft, you're taking off, the speed is low, then you achieve higher speeds and so on and so forth, right? Or when you're moving in a certain direction, the aerodynamics plays a certain role, right? So on the one side of the aircraft, the dynamics are different from the other side of the aircraft. So, and whatever else, right? So similarly, when you're looking at a rocket body, it may not have the same maneuvering that's required of a missile or of an aircraft, but it is flying in a parabolic path. But let us say for the largest part, it is just flying through from dense air to less dense air as it's moving through atmosphere into space. Whether it's a ballistic missile, intercontinental long-range ballistic missile, or a rocket which is launching satellites in space applications. So you require to test whether the body is adhering to and is capable of doing something. So you have these large wind tunnels wherein how do you study whether the air is creating turbulence on the wind, along the wing, and the wing is unstable as a consequence of that, or whether pressures are so high that the wing deforms, right, and can cause multiple other critical failures. The way in which even today things happen is you have this wind tunnel, and back in the day, like I was saying, you release colored smoke because you have to visualize it, right? So there is a glass window, and then let us say there's a blue smoke and a red smoke and a yellow smoke or whatever else across various sections of the body. And then you see that the yellow line is following a certain path and the red line is moving smoothly and so on and so forth.
Wow.
So you want to be able to visualize, and that's a very, very critical way by which is an important element of how you design aerostructures.
Right. Do they use that too often in training as well?
Yeah. So, I think training for maybe aerospace structure engineers, maybe yes, when you have to look at laminar flow as against some other flow, right? So, sure enough, I think it forms an element of training, but mostly it goes directly into the design and development. Okay. So, when you see turbulence of a certain kind, you know that the wing structure is not good enough. You see that, and then you say, okay, fine, I should do it in a different way. The entire process used to take like months, right? So you construct the aerostructure, and then you put it in the wind tunnel. Then you see how the visualization that I mentioned to you just now, and then you say, oops, and then you go back. And it's actually, you don't, because the structure behaves the same based on the geography, irrespective of what material it is.
Right.
So you want to study the stress and strain or whatever else. So they normally do wood carving or plastic so that you can quickly come up with a mold and then test it out again. And despite that, the process used to take very long.
Right.
So one of the use cases, the very first use cases that I was involved in is in building out a high performance computing model for doing this on a computer, as against having to go through the motion of having to build a physical model out of wood or plastic or whatever else and put it in a wind tunnel and test it out and so on and so forth. So in a sense, I began my career building simulators of a certain kind, which fed into the design and development program, not quite the training program.
Okay.
Now, coming back to where a later stage of the process may happen, right? Simulators, let me take a step back. Amongst the highest cost elements in keeping a fleet of aircraft or developing newer missiles and keeping them operationally ready, or keeping a tank battalion ready and so on and so forth is in the maintenance. Those are the highest cost contributors to the operational readiness of critical equipment. In the example that I'm mentioning to you, which is all defense oriented, of missile platforms, of naval platforms, of airborne platforms, and the support systems that are required to keep them operationally ready.
Right.
How do I test and make sure that my aircraft is ready? Right. How do I know that the health of some engine subsystem is good enough for it to fly again? Since we're talking about aircraft, so let us talk about it's an asset. And it's an asset when it is up in the air, not when it is down on the ground.
Correct.
So when an aircraft lands, the success of the Air Force, especially in a war scenario, is how soon can it send it back up?
Yeah.
And even for civilian aircraft, you would have noticed as you're sitting in an aircraft, you see the pilot or the ground staff going around doing inspections, checking with a torch around under the wing, under the undercarriage of the aircraft, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of inspections, whether it's a visual inspection or more with respect to testers of certain kinds. But not always is an aircraft available for you to do training of a bunch of people who come in.
Yeah.
Not always is aircraft engine available for you to help a maintenance engineer know how the aircraft engine should be maintained.
Correct.
So it's very expensive to take an engine out and say, okay, fine, all of you get into a classroom, I'm going to use this engine. The aircraft is lying without an engine right at that point in time.
Yeah.
Right? So it is a very expensive process, and it is also very safety critical. So how do you get as close to a realistic scenario for the training in a manner where the maintenance engineer feels adequately equipped to go and do things on a live aircraft?
Right.
And that is where I believe training simulators form a very, very critical role. When you think of aircraft, we have seen tons and tons of games, and we think of flight simulators, okay? But not everyone is a pilot. Correct. For every pilot, there are 100 ground support staff, okay? And they are very, very critical in keeping the aircraft flying.
Yeah.
And so that is one element of how the defense and aerospace industry can use training simulators to keep the fleet functional.
Right.
And this is true for missiles, this is true for naval systems, this is true for ground-based systems of which Army uses. Right? So,
now taking this to your work during Cisco. So I think Cisco would have probably not used so many simulators as such. That was a pure play MNC. Yep. I notice that especially in our country, as long as it's not too complex and too critical, and if it does not impact your bottom line or lives, the money invested in training is...
Which is unfortunate, yeah.
It's usually...
Yeah.
You've been an immersive technology buyer.
Yep.
And I've seen you purchase multiple, solutions from us.
Yep.
And I remember the conversation we were having about, what you had as a vision for, the LCA platform.
Yep.
When do you see India ready to start deploying, mixed and virtual reality in training in a mainstream way? Okay,
so I'll take a step back. I think you're being unfair in dissing India. Okay, this is a phenomenon which is worldwide. It happens all the way. Yeah. At Aero India last year, we had Dassault, the makers of Rafale, which is possibly the latest and greatest aircraft available anywhere in the world. And India has bought, there's the latest fleet in the Indian Air Force is the Rafale, which Dassault makes. And Dassault engineers came to our stall and saw the things that we had built out for the LCA. And they were saying, the Indian Air Force is looking for something very, very similar for the Dassault, for the Rafale, because we don't have that. We are not supplied that for the Rafale. So they were understanding what we have built out for the Tejas, light combat aircraft. So this is an aside saying that this is a worldwide phenomenon.
Right.
Most people believe that relying on the old age mechanisms of providing a user manual
We'll do
documentation and saying, well, yeah, I provided you a room full of documents.
Enjoy.
Go, go read it out. Right? So it is the way to do it. And that clearly is a good beginning, but nothing more than that.
Yeah.
You require things documented, but the documentation should be modeled in a manner where it can be more easily consumed. Equipping the users of the manual, and in this case, let us say the maintenance engineers or whoever else, to take quicker reactions, to understand things more fully, have a full-fledged visualization capability, which is oftentimes missing when you just read a flat text document.
Right.
Even if there is pictures explaining things, there is so much more a possibility and capability that a mixed reality, VR, AR can bring in to this world of training, especially for maintenance engineers that we talk about, aircraft maintenance engineers that we talk about, as against reading a bunch of documents and figuring things out. There are more recent technologies I'm exploring right now, and I'm hoping that you guys can get engaged at some point in time in building out digital twins, where we have the ability to simulate on the ground on a virtual platform the exact behavior of a very complex system. These aircraft systems are all very complex, or any defense platform is very, very complex. There's a lot of interplay between computer networks, normally storage to some extent. And if this happens and that happens, something else is not happening, and the environment imposes some other variable on us, and so this is happening. Right? As an example, let us say, I'll give you an example of how we give our car for maintenance, just because there are more users who may be attuned to that. You say, firstly, right, every 3 months or 10,000 kilometers, you go and give your car for servicing. What does 3 months and 10,000 kilometers have? Does the engine know, okay, fine, now this 3 months is over? No, it does not.
It does not.
Somebody has arrived at that saying that, okay, fine, as our ballpark, maybe around this time is when things should be maintained. That's a horribly wrong way of doing things, first and foremost, because the engine it behaves, engine, the tires and the brake padding and whatever else, behaves in an entirely different way, as an example. Now you go to the maintenance workshop and you say, when I was doing this light is coming. I don't know why. Something seems to be wrong. Or when I'm turning here, I'm not getting a good feel. The wheel balance seems to be off, right? So you are explaining your experience to the mechanic and hoping that he says, okay, fine, I think I know what the problem is.
Right.
Now, let us say the same thing happens. The Tejas lands. The first thing that happens is the pilot debriefs the maintenance engineer saying that, no, when I was doing this maneuver, I was going from 10,000 feet to 12,000 feet, and I was doing a right roll, and at that time, I observed something.
Right.
Okay. Now, your car mechanic can drive your car and see whether he sees the same feeling. The mechanic can't do that. The aircraft technician cannot do it. Right? So now he has to go by the pilot's explanation and make some assumptions on what could be the problem, quickly troubleshoot and arrive at what the problem is.
Wow. So literally visualize the problem there.
So if on the other hand, I had the ability to have a digital twin, so to speak, wherein the complex interplay of various systems, I'm able to model digitally.
Right.
Okay. Then the mechanic, the aircraft mechanic can virtually fly and see whether he's able to see the similar. So he can set the conditions in a manner where he is able to simulate the same conditions on the ground and then arrive at a pinpointed solution or a smaller set of problems to go after, rather than a wide variety of problems to go after.
Brilliant.
So the ability to simulate the complex interplay of the behaviors of various systems under certain external conditions and user-driven conditions. In this particular case, the pilot was flying at a certain speed. And the example I mentioned to you, going from 10,000 to 12,000 feet, doing a particular roll, and so on and so forth, right? That is user-driven. There are some external factors that may happen as a consequence of the environment and operational reasons. Maybe he's carrying so much fuel so much ammunition, that adds weight, and so consequently the maneuvers have a certain characteristic which are different from when he's low on fuel, low and not carrying ammunition, whatever else, right? So the ability to simulate that is a very critical ability, which being able to train people on the usage of those tools is, in my opinion, going to be a game changer.
Correct.
So platforms such as yours provides the ability to build those complex algorithms which may happen behind, which can more realistically simulate the interplay between the complex systems which go into what the user feels. The user, in this case, the pilot only says, hey, you know what, I did this, I saw a light coming on, I don't know why. It is unexplained to me. And so that is a danger that this aircraft has got. Go figure it out. Right? Now, from that symptom that has been described, you have to go and do something very. So it's almost like a doctor who was, you go and say, I have a headache. Now, the headache is because of what? Is it just overdrunk, or is it because you have a brain hemorrhage or something which is far more serious, right? So just as the human body is very, very complex, and you require a doctor to be able to diagnose properly and arrive at a small set of possible causes, do some tests and say, okay, I did test 1, 2, 3. I think 2 is a cause. I'm going to treat 2. The aircraft or missile system or a naval system is also as complex. There are varieties of behaviors which each system exhibit under various conditions, and it's not always feasible to do a linear interpolation and say, okay, fine, because I expect this to happen, something in between happened over here, it must be because of something between these two.
Right.
It's very, very complex. So being able to simulate that in a platform such as yours, in my opinion, is something which is feasible in the near future. And the manuals provide you the input to say how each system behave. But you can't stop there. That is input into a platform such as yours, which can then model it. And for me to test it out under various circumstances becomes very easy.
Right. Brilliant. So from a training to a diagnoser, that will be something we could think of. Brilliant. So, on a parting note, if you were to be presented a training solution or a product, what are those 2 or 3 things that are must-haves in it before you encourage a second conversation?
So, one of the first things I would look for is the ability to easily create and modify content. Content is a ever-changing world, right? So, whether it is you're building routers and switches like in a Cisco, or a HCL and Indian Air Force, which has got one version of the Tejas, another version of the Tejas Mark 1A has been built out, Mark 2 is coming up. In the future, an AMCA, the medium-weight combat aircraft, may come up, and so on and so forth. So a large part of the content that has been previously developed is readily applicable to a future variant, but some of it has changed. Some of it has had to be added.
Right.
What do you do, right? So how do I keep my content real and up to date at all points in time? Most training systems fail because the content is outdated.
Right. And modification is a problem.
Modification becomes very tough. So you're you're locked in to that vendor, or people just lose interest and say, hey, you know what, this is not working. Okay. So the ability to create and upgrade and keep the content constantly up to date is very, very critical. That's point number 1. Point number 2, the ease of doing that is the other thing, right? Wherein a subject matter expert who understands the underlying field, in the example that we're talking about, somebody who says, I understand aerospace, I understand an aircraft engine or a cockpit and so on and so forth. Whereas you and me as software developers do not understand, need not understand.
Right.
However, how easily can I position the software in a manner where the aerospace engineer can then say, you know what, okay, I drag and drops a bunch of widgets of a certain kind, put together a use case which I can relate to.
Got it.
Is very, very critical. So that is the second element, wherein you make it available for a subject matter expert who need not be a very highly trained software engineer.
Got it.
Now, if you have these 2 things available, then it becomes the third element, which is about making it available for the general public. How easily consumable is it for a bunch of trainees? Can I have a steady stream of, shall I say, batches of trainees coming in, conducting classes for them in a certain way, whether virtually, individual, in a classroom, whatever else it may be, and do so in a repeatable manner. Okay? Let us say I conduct a 6-month training program as an example, right? And you build out the platform which has got the ability to keep the user engaged through those 6 months. Enough content is available and content is up to date. The users who come in are not completely coming in blind. They have some level of knowledge. They should not come in and say, hey, this is stupid, doesn't make sense.
Right.
They should say, okay, fine, this is meaningful for me and it's adding value. That's on the content side. And then you have the framework wherein I get assessed as a trainee. There is something which somewhere I get logged. So within my enterprise, I have, the learning and development department has their own norms and metrics and other things that they need to collect. And me as a employee within the enterprise has certain amount of, points that I need to collect or whatever else. It's all on one part. Sometimes it is also about certification and qualification, especially in defense and aerospace. Among the toughest things why is that this technology is so difficult? Why is it this industry is so critical? It is primarily because it's safety critical and mission critical. Okay.
Right.
So there is a host of certification and qualification norms that you have to stand by.
Yeah.
And knowing what those certification requirements are is very, very tough to build in. So how do you model that into your training, whereby as an employee who is maintaining something, it is ingrained in me that the maintenance requirements are something.
Got it.
It's very, very tough to build in. So you're bringing in together a bunch of disparate requirements into a single way by which I can consume it as a user.
Right.
And that is very, very important.
Brilliant. So to summarize that, the modifications, content should be able to be modified for deployment at any time with the latest. And anybody should be able to edit it.
Yep.
And if it's scalable and accessible to a large population, then I think these are probably the 3 things that Mix3d also brings along.
Which is why I'm particularly enthused and excited about what you guys have built out. I believe it has got a lot of promise. It epitomizes some of the things that I mentioned to you just now. The ability to scale is present, which I believe is amongst the biggest plus points the platform that you built out has got. The user interface and its ability to either model it in an immersive virtual reality head-mounted display mechanism or a flat screen
desktop,
providing a desktop ability to consume it, is, in my opinion, an easy ability for you to reach out to a larger community. There may be areas where something one form factor can be deployed and another cannot be, or whatever else may be a reason.
Right.
In a classroom situation, you may have a desktop kind of use case, whereas in a one-to-one kind of use case, you may have a more immersive use case. I think what you guys have built out is really phenomenal, and I really hope that you're able to scale in a manner where the other elements that I mentioned to you, like the certification qualification norms getting a part of, for me to easily model that and make it a part of how I get trained as a user, or how do I do things where I'm easily able to transport the content to a later use case that may happen, where 80% of the content is the same, I just modify 20% and make it available for a newer platform or evolving platform, right? So those things are all I see as huge plus points, and I wish you the very, very best. I hope that more and more things come out of the platform that you guys have built out.
Thank you so much, sir. We look forward
pleasure.
to meeting you again on another podcast on a different topic.
I look forward to that, Jay.
Thank you so much, sir. Pleasure.